Okay, hi, I'm Katie Leslie. I am a board certified cognitive specialist. I'm the director of coach development here at Illuminos, and I really work with students and families navigating complex neurodivergent learning profiles. So today we are going to talk about demand avoidance, which is just something that many families encounter, but we often struggle to understand. Parents frequently describe feeling stuck in cycles of reminders, conflict, resistance, and my goal today is to help explain why that happens and how we can approach it differently. I'm just really excited to talk about this today because I'm going over it so often with parents in small chunks in our meetings rather than getting to discuss it in its entirety and go through the basics. So we're going to go through everything and then we'll have time for questions and discussion at the end. And I would really encourage, as we're going through things that might really resonate with you and your experience with your clients or parents' experience with your student, I would love to share some real life examples that we might be able to work through here a little bit today if people are comfortable. And we can just put them in the chat, or if somebody's comfortable explaining their situation, I'd love to take the strategies we're talking about and really cover them in real life, how they're actually showing up for you in your world. So I want us to focus today both on understanding about why this profile or behavioral pattern develops, and then also move into the practical strategies that we might address or might use to address them. And what's really important about our lens today is that it is nervous system based. So demand avoidance is a nervous system response to perceived threat. It's not a battle of wills, and it is not laziness or defiance. Many psychologists today actually go so far as to refer to pervasive demand avoidance, or PDA, as a nervous system disorder. And that's the approach that we're going to explore more. So my hope for this session is that we all walk away with understanding that helps us reframe our students' behavior so that we may have more patience and empathy, and then subsequently more bandwidth for strategies that actually help them through the nervous system response. All right, Wendy, you want to try the next slide? Perfect. Okay, so what are we talking about? What does this look like? I'm often hearing from parents that it isn't that their child can't do the work, and that in other environments or circumstances, they handle this level of pressure or responsibility totally fine. They're very bright, they could have straight A's, or they can spend hours playing video games. So why can't they spend hours focusing on something they need to do, like studying or cleaning their room? So from this perspective, it's very easy to assume that this behavior is intentional, but it really is not. What we often see clinically is that the behavior is strongly influenced by the child's nervous system state at the moment the demand is introduced. So demand avoidance is not a formal diagnosis. We get this question a lot. It's not in the DSM-5. Some psychologists feel comfortable including it in a psychoeducational evaluation, but others do not. And it's best understood as a behavioral pattern that we frequently observe in neurodivergent populations because it is a learned physical response to stressors. So these children are often intelligent, they're thoughtful, they're capable, but certain kinds of demand triggers strong resistance or shutdown because throughout their life, if something was very overwhelming for them and they had no explanation or tools to make sense of that, the best thing their nervous system can do in that moment to regulate itself is to escape the demand. So understanding why that happens in our kiddos with different neurotypes is also just key to addressing it effectively. So demand avoidance can appear in really many different forms, and a lot of people assume that it is just defiance or like a huge outward response, but it can also happen inwardly, especially for our perfectionist girlies with different neurotypes like ADHD and anxiety combined. But a lot of the time we're seeing resisting passively by delaying or ignoring requests. Others become argumentative or emotionally escalated. Some children shut down entirely. So the behaviors can look very different on the surface, but they often come from the same underlying nervous system response. So if we think of emotional regulation as a box of tools, and your child who is used to existing in a neurotypical world where their nervous system is not understood, then they most likely do not have the language to say, I'm stuck in task paralysis, or the cumulative cognitive load of my day has overwhelmed me and I need a break. Or I don't know how to get started. I struggle with transitioning. Or I know I need to do this, but I don't know why I can't make myself start. And it's not that I don't care. Kids and teens are very rarely given the chance to understand themselves through that kind of lens, so then they don't have any idea how to articulate what's happening. So their big tools in their toolbox that they're going to reach for when they're met with a demand that their body and brain is not ready for is most likely going to be ignoring it, yelling, lying, immediate defensiveness, causing a scene, anything to escape the demand that their body is not capable of in its current state. And once your body practices this over and over, it becomes automatic, and then parents are often the stimuli that triggers that response because they're the ones that are so often paired with demand. Okay, so a little bit more about PDA versus demand avoidance. So the term PDA was originated in the UK. It's still debated clinically, and in the United States, it's not currently a formal diagnosis. But the patterns that it describes are very real. So we're really looking at a spectrum, and some of it looks like situational avoidance, and others show pervasive demand avoidance, which is a more pervasive pattern, and almost any demand can trigger anxiety and resistance. So the situational demand avoidance is really when primarily exhibited when they are overwhelmed or stressed. But kids with pervasive demand avoidance feel an intense need to control situations. They experience ordinary expectations as threats, and they often use sophisticated strategies to avoid demands, like what we would perceive as like lying and manipulation. And whether a child fits a PDA profile or shows just situational demand avoidance, the underlying driver is still typically anxiety within the nervous system and dysregulation, and the strategies we're discussing today help in both situations. Okay, so like I will keep saying and probably say 50 more times today, demand avoidance is not laziness, it's not intentional manipulation. And when neurodivergent people lose control of their environment, the consequences can truly be intolerable. So they learn to have a huge response or a freeze response in order to escape that loss of control around that intolerable stimuli. And I'm going to give a long example about how this might form over time for a neurodivergent child. So let's say we have a young boy in kindergarten. He's undiagnosed with autism, and he enters the classroom for the first time. But the fluorescent lights hurt his eyes and his head so badly that he cries the whole day. And he doesn't understand that the pain and discomfort is even coming from the lights. He just knows that he can't handle that pain. And the next day he tells mom, I don't want to go to school, my head hurts. But he can't tell her more about why. And she dismisses it and sends him anyway because she probably thinks that he's just trying to adjust, and she doesn't really understand the severity. She's not sure why he's making the fuss, and thinks, we all have to get adjusted here. Everything's brand new. So we continue this pattern where he goes through that pain again. He keeps going through it again and again. Mom isn't listening. Teacher isn't listening, but the pain is not getting better. So in that situation, what does a small child who is in pain have left in terms of options? What does he start to do? He throws huge tantrums, fits, he refuses to go to school. And then a family comes to a psych office and says, my child is refusing school, he's throwing fits, he's defiant. And notice that that is very different language than, my child is in pain and can't escape it. So what that child learns is that when he loses control over a novel situation, no one will listen and he will experience discomfort and pain. And what that does the body then do? The next time someone tries to force him to do something, he'll explode. He'll try to escape it because his body is protecting him. That is the cycle in which most neurodivergent children's bodies learn pervasive demand avoidance, often because of misunderstood sensory processing issues. Okay, so a little bit more about that nervous system response. The brain is constantly scanning for cues of safety or threat. And when a situation feels manageable and predictable, the nervous system remains regulated. But when something feels overwhelming or threatening, the brain shifts into a protective state. And this obviously shifts directly our behavior and our cognitive functioning. So, what we might perceive as just math homework for a neurodivergent kid feels very overwhelming and it's perceived as a threat. So, in response to the threat, they become dysregulated. I'll give another example that might be more in line with the kids that we're seeing all the time. Um, a 12-year-old girl with ADHD and anxiety spends an exorbitant amount of energy every day at school trying to keep up because she is bright and she wants to do well. But she doesn't really understand why she can't do it like the other kids. And she's always living in fear and shame that she's going to get found out, that she forgot something, that she stopped listening, didn't hear the instructions. And that's happening every day. By the time she gets home, neurochemically, she has nothing left in the tank, very low levels of dopamine left to be able to start even more tasks that require so much more cognitive effort than her peers. So when her mom comes in and says, "It's time to start your homework. I saw on the portal you have math," but she can't get started right now in the state she's in. Her body just panics. It has no tools except to escape by any means necessary, even if there are consequences later. Her body is prioritizing safety right now. So she lies and she says, "I already turned it in." And then it shows up the next day as missing in the portal. Her mom grounds her, and her mom is wondering, why does she keep lying when she knows she's going to get grounded? But then we just end up repeating this cycle, and it just keeps parent and child more disconnected from the actual issue, which is that she's profoundly struggling, even if she doesn't appear to be. And instead, we're focused on the issue then of lying, losing trust, getting grounded over and over again. And that's when kids often say, "My parent doesn't understand me. I can't trust them." Alrighty. So when children are regulated, they can think flexibly and engage with requests. When the nervous system shifts into a threat response, the brain prioritizes protection rather than cooperation. This is when we see fight, flight, or freeze behaviors, which is why in the previous example, when she knows she's going to get grounded for lying, she does it anyway because her body's priority is safety in that moment. It is not able to process delayed consequences. So it can be helpful to think of the nervous system as a ladder. I'm going to give two examples here. One is this window of tolerance, but let me just talk through the first one. At the top of the ladder, the brain is regulated. This is where children can think clearly, cooperate, and problem solve. But as stress increases, the nervous system moves down the ladder. So first we see tension and irritability, and then we have a fight or flight response. This can look like arguing, avoidance, distraction, or leaving the situation. And then at the lowest level, we see freeze or shutdown. The child may stare or become silent or say they can't do the task at all. So, one of the most important insights for parents is that you cannot reason with a nervous system that is in threat mode. The brain must move backward toward regulation before cooperation becomes possible. And then another way to look at that is the window of tolerance, which is often used in a tool in traditional therapy. And in this window, you're able to function, you're able to reason and perform, but in various states of hyper or hypoarousal, your ability to function decreases. So the window of tolerance for a neurodivergent person is often much smaller or more narrow than that of a neurotypical person. Okay, I don't want to get too behavioral analysis in this. I don't want to go into too much depth, but I think this is a very helpful concept from behavioral science that can help make sense of what's happening. And that is that all behavior serves a function. When a behavior continues to occur, it is usually because the behavior is helping the individual achieve something that their nervous system needs. And in behavioral psychology, we typically describe four broad functions of behavior. That's escape or avoidance, access to something desired, attention or connection, or sensory regulation. This framework is useful because it shifts the question from why is my child doing this to what is this behavior doing for my child or how is it serving them? What are they getting after this behavior, which is the consequence that makes this behavior more likely to occur again? So Escape is one of the most common behavioral functions that we see in demand avoidance, right? So if a task feels overwhelming, stressful, or unpredictable, avoiding the task produces immediate relief for the body. And that teaches the brain something important. It learns when I avoid the situation, my stress decreases and I become regulated. So, because the nervous system experiences that relief, the avoidance behavior becomes more likely to happen again in the future. And this is not manipulation, it's just a very basic learning process called reinforcement. And reinforcement simply means that a behavior becomes more likely to occur again. So if a child avoids homework and their stress decreases, the nervous system experiences relief. That relief reinforces the avoidance behavior. And this is why demand avoidance can become a repeating pattern over time. And the goal is not to eliminate the child's need for relief. That is a nervous system signal that we cannot ignore and we have to work through it. The goal is actually to help the child experience success and regulation while engaging in the demand. So we're putting another behavior in its place where they're engaging with demand, and then the consequence of that is success and regulation, which will then reinforce the behavior of engaging with the demand. So then that cooperation becomes the behavior that gets reinforced. Alrighty, so just a little bit about why demand avoidance is so common for neurodivergent kids. And we talked about this a little bit earlier with my first example, but many neurodivergent children have a higher baseline anxiety. So their window of tolerance is just going to be smaller and more narrow. They have more sensory sensitivities, so they're not able to have the bandwidth to manage all of their sensory sensitivities and also carry out regular cognitive functions. They might need a break, they might need a change of scenery, they might need a hard reset before we can expect them to perform in any way. They also have slower task initiation, especially for any kind of learning difference, ADHD, or autism. That includes transitions. So, transitioning from a preferred activity or a low demand activity to a high demand or non preferred activity is incredibly difficult for neurodivergent people. And sometimes we just need more processing time to allow their body to prepare for moving into a demand. And then lower tolerance for unpredictability, that last one. It's just about novel situations or things that are perceived as difficult or hard. Kids who have neurodivergent profiles typically tend to shy away from things that they perceive as difficult because they don't want to be perceived as not being smart, or they feel like because they aren't able to do it on their own, they don't want to ask for help. And there's a lot of shame and obfuscation around completing tasks. Okay, and then another thing to note is that the same skills required to comply with the demand are the skills that are already most vulnerable to stress. So when you think about that with executive function, when a child becomes dysregulated, their ability to start a task, organize their thinking, or regulate frustration decreases. So from the outside, it can look like all out refusal, but neurologically, it can be a capacity issue that's happening in the moment. All right, and then one reason why this is also so common for neurodivergent children is that we have to think about the hidden demands inside of one request. So let's take something really simple. A parent says, go start your homework. For an adult, this sounds like a simple request. But for many of our neurodivergent children, that request requires several executive function processes at once that their system might not be ready for at this time. They have to disengage from whatever they are currently doing. They have to locate their materials. They have to remember what the assignment is. They need to organize the steps required to complete it. They may need to tolerate uncertainty about whether they can do it correctly. They need to initiate the task after they've already set everything up. They actually have to get started, which is often one of the hardest executive function skills to master. And they must sustain attention long enough to make progress. So when all of those demands hit the brain at once, the nervous system may interpret the tasks as overwhelming, and avoidance becomes, again, the quickest way to reduce that pressure. So then we have the escalation cycle, which is extremely common. Parents increase pressure because they're trying to ensure the task gets completed. The child experiences that pressure as increased threat, which intensifies avoidance, and then both sides feel stuck and there's no resolution. We also have repeated prompting that ends up escalating the whole situation. So parents often repeat prompts because they want to help the child stay on track. But for some children, each reminder then increases that internal pressure. So then we're getting more and more dysregulated. And instead of helping with task initiation, it can make starting feel even harder. I'll give you an example that's very current with one of my families right now. I'm working with a family about trying to wake up in the morning. And the student I'm working with is a high school senior with autism and ADHD. And mom says that he frequently makes the entire house late. And he says every time she comes in to remind him to get up and says, "Hey, it's time to get up. We have to go," and gives him that command, his body decides even more that he's not going. And he told me yesterday, once my body has decided I'm not doing it, there is no way I can make myself do it. I'm too angry and it feels like it's not something I can control. And then we move into power struggles, which really don't serve our purpose. They're not focused on our goals, and we don't get anywhere from them. Once interactions move into these control battles, the original goal of completing the task becomes secondary. The nervous systems on both sides are activated, and that's why these situations often feel so exhausting for families. And then also the problem at hand becomes the yelling, the lying, the defiance, the disruption, and not the task itself. By then, we've lost the plot and we need to reframe and figure out how to just focus on what our target behavior is. Okay, so let's move into strategies. I'm going to talk a little about each one, and then again, if we have some real life examples that we want to talk through, I'd love to try to use some of these strategies in real time and give examples that are most relevant and applicable to your guys' situations. But let's start with collaborative language. We also hear about this as low demand language or declarative language. All of it is sort of the same crux. It is removing command from the conversation. So this kind of phrasing reduces perceived control while keeping expectations clear. And many children respond better when they feel like they have some agency in the process. Because again, as soon as your nervous system feels like you have no control and you're given a very precise demand, you're probably sending your child right into that state of fight, flight, or freeze. And you would be amazed at how differently they respond just by changing the way you're asking them to do something. And it can be a really huge shift and hard to do in the moment. But I really like to think about it like, how do you talk to your coworker who is not your boss? And you are not their boss. So if you have a project due and you and this person are working together on it, you wouldn't say, "Cynthia, I expect this to be done by 4." That's not appropriate. It's not respectful. You would say, "Hey, what does your schedule look like? When do you think it could be reasonable for me to expect that this is done? Because I have to get the next step done." That is collaborative. It gives respect. It avoids any express commands and it asks questions. That might feel like you're losing a little bit of parental authority. But I promise you, I do this with every single student I have, and it is the crux of our rapport building. And I have so many parents who say, "She'll only talk to you about that," or "He will only do this work with you." And it's because I approach all tasks like this. I give them autonomy and I give them respect. Okay, controlled choice. So giving as much choice as possible within an expectation restores autonomy without removing the expectation that the task will happen. The task remains the same, but the child has control over the pathway as much as possible. And the idea is that for demand avoidant kids is that we give them as much autonomy in the process as possible and then explain why you're doing that. So one way I love to approach things in sessions with my student is I come to their level and I absolutely level with them. I'm like, "Look, we have to do this. I know it sucks. I know you hate it and it feels really hard. And I don't care how it gets done today as long as it gets done. So how do you want to do it? What do you think is best?" And whatever they choose, then you make a deal about how to make sure what they chose actually happens. So let's say they don't want to start right now. They want to start later. So then you'd say, "Okay, cool. So you want to start at 5. How do you want me to make sure you're able to get started at 5? Maybe at 5, I'll come get you with like a snack and you can do it at the table. This is also what we would consider collaborative language from the first strategy, asking questions and giving suggestions rather than placing a demand. And the rule of thumb is if you don't absolutely have to demand something, then don't do it. Give them as much choice as possible. I have a mom I'm working with right now. Her daughter's 16 and just recently was diagnosed with ADHD. And she told me that she shifted her mindset from policeman to assistant. So she used to tell her, this project needs to be done tonight or you can't go out this weekend. And I'm going to check in every hour to make sure you're still working. And she said that it never worked. She never got the work done. And it only ever led to these blow up fights. But ever since she has gotten the ADHD diagnoses and they've learned about it, and mom has reframed it as, oh, she's doing the best she can with the tools she has, then she approaches that situation now like, hey, I saw in the portals you've got a major load today. How do you want to handle it? I was thinking if I go up, I can tidy your desk and get you a snack while you lay and scroll and take a long beat. Do you think that might help? She said that this has made the biggest difference in their household because she's acknowledging for her child that it's hard. This really shifts the language away from, well, I need to force you to do this easy thing that I expect you to be able to do, into, how can I help you through this thing that's really tough? And I know you can do hard things, but it's okay if it takes some help. And sometimes that shift is all that we really need. Okay, so we spoke a little bit about this earlier, processing time. Most neurodivergent kids, no matter what their neurotype looks like, they need additional time to shift attention and prepare mentally for a task. So immediate compliance with a command may not be realistic, and repeated prompts during that window often increases resistance too. So giving them a longer window to process that they're going to need to start doing something non-preferred. But then also, I will add to this strategy, just one of my favorites from behavioral science, is a proximity prompt. What I mean by this is that you literally, you put your body in proximity to them and you stay silent. So let's say we set the tone, we figure out how we want to get things done, we give them time to process that transition, they've decided how they want to do it. And the next time they see you, they know what you're coming in to say. You're like, okay, we've decided on this. It's 5 o'clock. Let's get started. But if you say, okay, it's 5, I'm expecting you to get started, and you leave the room, that allows them to just keep laying there. So instead, you do not leave. You may go sit near them and give them an expectant look, maybe put your hand on their arm, and you just wait. And you don't argue, you don't raise the stakes. It's just silent proximity so they cannot escape the fact that, hey, it's 5 o'clock, this is what we agreed on. And it's a calm reminder that they agreed to it. It's also uncomfortable. For younger kids, it works wonders because you're a silent reminder, oh, I have to go do this task. But as you get older with your teenagers, it's also just weird and uncomfortable and they want to escape it. So they're like, okay, I'll get started. And they actually get up and move. I found that this has worked for kids as young as 5 up to 18. And in fact, I gave this as a suggestion to a family that I was working with yesterday, who's also a senior in high school. Okay, prioritizing regulation. This is such a big one. It could be a whole webinar in and of itself, but simply put, if the escalation already happened, there's yelling, there's major lying, there's shutdown. When you see those behaviors, you control what happens next. You can engage with them and become dysregulated yourself, or you can recognize them as signals that your child is not in a state where they can handle the stimuli, and you pivot towards regulation and reconnection. That sounds very kumbaya, but I promise that it comes out feeling very normal. So you say, hey, I'm noticing you're really raising your voice and you can't talk to me that way. But I think you're not ready to talk about this right now. So when can we chat about it? Maybe in like half an hour? So you don't let them fully escape the conversation, but you let them decide when it happens and then give them that processing time. And in between that time, you don't have to fully remove yourself unless you think that like a sensory break would be best. But if you're in the proximity, talk about anything else positive. The trap that forms is that you just become the homework monster and they're always expecting that you're going to be on them about assignments. So you fight against that actively by telling them something funny about your day. Ask fewer questions about them. Get their opinion on something that's going on with their sister or the dog, or a new episode of a show you guys are going to watch. Anything but school that helps remind them, oh, I'm connected to my parent and it is not just about them being homework police. Then again, if they have other sensory needs, you could ask if they want to, if they're younger, you want to go jump on the trampoline or take a walk. You could suggest they go take a nap with the lights off. And when the time comes that they agreed that you talk about the assignment, go in with other strategies and acknowledge the dysregulation. So, hey, it felt like talking before was really overwhelming. Can you tell me how you were feeling? I'm never trying to make you feel that. How about we talk about this in a different way? Okay, and then this last one is just sort of all encompassing, but it touches on what we talked about before about truly figuring out what your target is. I spend a lot of time talking with parents who come to us with a child who might be deep in a homework hole, several failing classes, and after 3 months, that kid is making progress. They have zero missing assignments. And I get on the phone with their parent expecting to have a celebratory conversation about all of these little victories. But when we get on, they say, well, now they will not clean their room and it's a problem. And I think it's really important to remember that your child has finite bandwidth, and the goal is to get them through school and help them be successful. And if it's not that big of a problem, don't let it be such a problem. They're doing what you ask them to do. And we've lost sight a little bit of the target, and our expectations are not in line with their capabilities, especially if they were struggling with many different executive functioning processing. Now they're doing better. Of course, maybe now their room is a mess because they're managing so many other things. So if we're seeing that they're putting effort in that they were not before, that's proof that it was never a laziness or defiance issue. It was a lack of understanding and emotional regulatory tools. So if you can give your child as much of a break as possible as other things pop up and realize that their prefrontal cortex is growing gradually and they will not approach things in an adult way, nor should they, then we start to realize that progress and success is supposed to look incremental. Okay, so long-term goals, reducing pressure, increasing safety, and building skills and autonomy. The goal is not immediate compliance. It's long-term capacity for independence and self-management, and that happens when children feel safe, capable, and respected. And just to recap our takeaways, demand avoidance is a nervous system response. Increasing the pressure increases the resistance, and safety, autonomy, and skill building increase cooperation. So when parents shift their lens from defiance to nervous system response, strategies change and interactions often become calmer. Okay, so now for question and answer. Lindsay or Wendy, if you were wanting to moderate questions,
Sure.
Okay.
Sure. We have a few questions and some that popped up in the chat that I tried to grab. If for some reason I miss your question, either copy and paste it back in the chat or just unmute and you can ask it at the end. So in case anyone has to go, we have about 12 more minutes. If you can stay, I just do want to thank everybody for being here as we go into Q&A, and also let you know that we are going to share the video recording of this next week so that you can share it with others. Katie, did you want to say something there?
No, that's fine. I'm just reading through the chat. So if you want to pick which questions, I don't know how you'd like to best do this.
Sure. I'm going to start with the folks that submitted questions before the webinar. So, what do you do when there is an absolute refusal? I know you wanted more information, Katie, so you might want to ask for more
If someone
context.
who submitted this question can provide me a little bit more context, that is like kind of too broad to understand how to answer. So if you feel comfortable, just go ahead and give more context in the chat.
Okay, while
And
we
maybe
wait
we
for
move
that,
on.
let me start with could the oh here we go. How does PDA compare to imposter syndrome?
Hmm. That's such an interesting question. I think that almost every student with ADHD experiences imposter syndrome. It overlaps, and I think most kids feel like they are about to be found out, that they they don't know what they're doing and they're trying really hard to keep their chaos like a controlled mess. But if something goes awry, one thing or another thing, then everything might fall and they might get caught in a lie or an explanation that they can't get out of. And really, they're not doing as badly as they think they're doing. They are assuming that neurotypical people have all of these capabilities that they don't have, but they don't understand why. So I think that syndrome is really about anxiety and perception of like what is failure and what is working hard. And then PDA might come on top of it, where if anything messes up their system, like their carefully curated representation of themselves in front of school or in front of parents, then they might have a nervous system response that is highly dysregulated.
Okay. Could the feeling of a lack of safety be triggered simply by a feeling of lack of freedom to do what they want?
Yes, absolutely. So this goes back to, I find this especially with all of our students with autism, but it also happens in kids with ADHD. The fear of lack of freedom mainly comes from this idea that when they were younger, they were gaslit for a long time in a neurotypical environment that the things that really mattered to them don't matter. So I'm 3 and my mom puts my sock on weird and I cannot handle it. But my mom keeps saying, "You're fine, you're fine, you're fine, you're fine." Now, after that, I don't want anyone to put my socks on for me. I don't like shoes. I refuse to wear shoes. We escalate because it's all about the control. Because what they learn over and over again is if I don't have freedom, I might be exposed to something that nobody is going to acknowledge or help me get relief from.
Okay, we've got some feedback that you've been giving some great answers, Katie. So, as I always say about you, you're amazing, and thank you so much. Um,
Thanks.
I have to tell everybody real quick, like Illumino's is great, but Katie makes it even better because of her incredible knowledge and willingness to share it in a really concise and logical way that people can follow and understand. And her work with our kids and the team that she um, has doubly trained with probably over 30 hours at this point of training for the neurocomplex piece that we offer is quite life changing. So it is because of her, and I don't ever like to take credit because it really is all Katie. So okay, so let's see here. It looks like someone responded to the first question, giving us additional information. So this was the absolute refusal. My child is very resistant to regulation strategies when he's agitated. Movement, breathing, fidgets, all suggestions enrage him further. Any suggestions?
I think at that point, he might be so averse, depending on his experience with the therapies he's had. And a lot of the time when therapies, we mean really well, but we end up doing more damage because we're not understanding the child's internal experience. From this, it sounds like his internal experience is not well understood. And it might be that isolation and like sensory deprivation is what he needs to calm down. And then we ask over and over again, what do you need? What are you feeling? It's okay. You don't have to do anything except try to explain how you feel. So sometimes we're so caught up in a cycle with our kids that what we have to do before we can really make any progress is break that cycle. And that might feel uncomfortable. It might feel unproductive. You're not getting the task done. He's not going to school. This isn't working. What we have to do first is reset that safety between you and him before he's even able to explain what he needs. So, all out refusal sometimes comes from that learned helplessness where if I say yes to this, what's going to happen next? So, even just, okay, well, why don't you take a fidget? It's like, no, you still don't understand. So, it might be that your very first step is, okay, I'm going to leave you alone. I'm going to set a timer and I'll come back in 15 minutes. All I want to ask is, how are you feeling? That's it. And you just leave it alone. And if he misses homework for a day, that it's not as important as building that trust with him back up so that you guys can get to a place where you have effective strategies. Sorry if that was a little convoluted.
I think that was helpful. I also just threw in the chat because someone did bring up 2E kids, and I do want to take a moment to share that Julie Skolnick was on this call. She's fantastic when it comes to 2E parenting coaching, and she has written a book that you can listen to or you can read. And I put the link in it. It's like $10. It is so worth it. I'm on the third time having a child that's 2E. and pretty neurospicy. And it just helps me even every time I read it again and again to find more in it. So I put that in there if anyone else is interested. A few more questions so we can try to get through some of these. My son recently had strep and he had a high fever, severe sore throat, body aches, etc. We couldn't get him to take medication for anything, despite trying to explain that it would make him feel better. Even every time we asked, he would get angrier and more resistance. He was in pain, and we couldn't help him with the medication. Do you have any suggestions for that, Katie?
Medicine refusal and ARFID with kids. I'm assuming that he might have autism. It's really common and it's a big struggle. I would say, um, however, I don't know what the medicine was, but I've worked with younger kids where we just get to the point where we're hiding it in other things. And ARFID is such a real thing, and trying to have that power struggle in that moment when he's already so dysregulated because he doesn't feel good, it's not going to get you anywhere and it's not worth it. Just try to do whatever you can to stick it in somewhere else. Even if it's like you're getting some of the, I don't know if it's available in the US, I'm sorry, I'm abroad, like the powder forms of an anti-inflammatory or something that you can mix in juice or his favorite thing. Like look for all of the medicines that are available that you can hide them, like best hide them, rather than try to work on that at this time, because I would say probably it's not developmentally appropriate. He doesn't really have the developmental understanding, like, but you need this, it will make you feel better. In that moment, he's so dysregulated and he's probably so averse to medicines to begin with that he's not hearing you.
Okay, I don't mean to quickly move through, but I want to get a couple more of these in.
Sure.
So, someone you can relate to, Katie, an Audi HD kid. That means the child has ADHD and autism. Almost 10-year-old girl is 2E in fourth grade and is experiencing extreme restraint collapse outside of school in just about every area of life. School is great and grades are great, but collaborative language is being used as our choices, but she still resists just about every task. She struggles with transition, especially leaving the home and being on time somewhere. We use timers and break tasks into chunks, but we're still at a loss. What would you recommend?
This is hard. I'd like to talk to everybody individually and I have so many more questions. So again, too, Wendy, do you want me to share my link too? If anyone wants to have a parent consult with me, I do this all the time
I
where,
did. Yeah, I
okay.
did share. If everybody got it, I can share it again. A link to get to Katie. Katie, if you want to share your direct one, you can do it too. I did it to our request consultation and then they'll get over to you.
Let me do that because what I don't like is wasting people's time. If it sounds like you've tried so many different strategies and it's still not working, then I want to go back to the drawing board and understand that everything you have tried so I can put in some new strategies without wasting time answering the question. If you've already tried everything, I would suggest first. Let me
Okay,
think.
so I do want to end on time and I do want to call out somebody. Gabrielle, I don't mean to call you out on the spot, but if you could unmute and talk a little bit about how you use movement to help kids like that, that would be great.
Wendy, thank you. And I just want to say thank you so much for this excellent presentation. I'm trying to find you guys so I can get back to gallery view. There we go. Great. Thanks, Wendy. So as a physical therapist and an Alexander Technique teacher, I work with kids with very simple movement strategies with fight, flight, freeze reflexes. I actually have been working with a young lady with PDA. And I love how you've been emphasizing that this is a central nervous system, physiological, body-based issue. This is not something that kids feel like they have control over. So when we're working with, what I like to call with kids the downstairs brain, our deeper midbrain, brainstem, where our fear reflexes reside, if we're working at those foundational levels with movement and reflex movement strategies, then what we're doing is we're creating what I like to call neurological safety. That's kind of what we're talking about. We're talking about neurological safety. The brain doesn't feel safe. Kids are in a safe home, but their brain doesn't feel safe and they don't know why. And so the other thing that's really great about working with movement is, especially for the kids that aren't quite ready to talk about it or struggle with the cognitive strategies. The fidgets and quiet are helpful, but they're not necessarily getting to the source of the problem. So if we can kind of get into our nervous systems at a deeper level by working with our primary primitive reflexes, then we're really giving them a foundation. That's the quick answer. Thanks, Wendy.
No, thanks, Gabrielle. Sorry, we had a lot of experts on this call, a lot of folks from the community. It's really nice to see you all. And there was a few that I wanted to shout out to just because they really tie directly into what we're talking about. There are some more questions, but I don't want to keep everyone on. So if you have to leave, we left you. This is also another way you can book a call with Katie. You can scan the QR code. And remember, we really do work with a ton of neurodivergent kids, but we also work with just those struggling with simple executive functioning skills. And we do it virtually and in homes. So if you need anything, shout. In the meantime, if you do want to stay on and hear answers, I will let Katie run through these and I'll ask her. By the way, Gabrielle also put something in the chat. Let me go through a couple more of these questions. No worries if you have to jump. Let's see here. So another question, how do we balance prioritizing their regulation with preparing them for work outside the home?
Yeah, this is a tough one. I will say when I get this question a lot from parents, I answer it from the perspective that I'm coming from, which is that uh, we are approaching this student with a message that they are most likely not getting anywhere else. Outside in the real world, every day at school, in work, at college, they will receive the message that they are not enough, that they aren't doing it wrong, that they're not working hard enough, that they have to hide, that they have to pretend. Um, if we can be a safe zone inside our house where they can actually unmask, they can actually say, I don't know why I can't do the dishes. I don't know. I hate it and I can't get started. That is so much more valuable for their nervous system, for your relationship, and for their emotional regulatory skills as an adult than it is to be like, well, you just got to learn to do it. They will learn to do it. But the most important thing you can provide them is a safe zone where they don't have anywhere else. So I would say it's not about preparing them for the real world. The real world will come. But what we're missing, especially in those teen years, is that ability to really build safety and trust with your neurodivergent child when they go off into the real world and then life gets really complicated and confusing.
Thank you, Katie. Another question. My daughter, who is also a senior in high school, I have one of those too, needs silence by herself in her room for at least an hour, sometimes even longer, no one talking to her, and she needs to take a sensory break. Actually, it sounds just like my son. She often will fall asleep, and then when she wakes up, she can continue school or other college-related tasks. So she wanted to add to the conversation by saying that. So I wanted to include that in what we were talking about.
Such a great
Um,
example. And leaning into that instead of saying, "Hey, you've been napping for too long. When are you going to finish your homework?" That's not helpful, but realizing that her body knows what it needs and leaning into it and saying, "Hey, thanks for taking a break and resetting your body. That is productive. That is responsible. How can I help you get set up if you need to start doing work?"
so thanks for that contribution.
Yeah, thank
Um,
you.
let's see. I want to make sure that I am not repeating. We didn't talk about a 7-year-old child yet, right? So a 7-year-old child who we highly suspect of being neurodivergent had an evaluation, and the psychologist said there is no ADHD or autism because behaviors are only at home and not school. She has significant sensory issues in PDA, emotional dysregulation, and quality of life at home is significantly impacted. Now the family can't get services because of the lack of the behavioral diagnosis. What path do you suggest?
This is such a common refrain. I'm so sorry. Um, especially for girls, our girls are incredible at masking and they learn from a very young age, like all of the social requirements, and they show up to school like highly functional and then they come home and completely implode. That does not mean that they can then control their behaviors. They have control over it. Therefore, it's not a disorder. That's not true. I would highly recommend that you go to a different neurodivergent affirming practitioner and get reevaluated because your child deserves it.
And I'm not sure where you're located, but if you want to reach out to me, feel free. I try to make it my business to know great people all over. And if I don't personally know someone, I have a great network I can reach out to. So feel free to shoot me an email or a note. I will actually put my email in here for everybody if you want to do that. Um, and I'm happy to give you that information. So I just put my email in there. Now we have this is going to be an older one. My son is 33. He was diagnosed with PDD and NOS at age 2 and autism at age 9. I heard about PDA a year or two ago, and I knew I was onto something. He checks every box. It's just life changing. Life is better for us now. I can't imagine how different it would have been to get this information 30 years ago. If you were still in school, I'd be signing up immediately. I didn't know if there's anything you wanted to add, Katie. That was more of a comment, I guess, than a question. I'm trying to hit everybody's here.
What I will say is that coaching is beneficial lifelong. I would say that most people with ADHD and autism, their symptoms will fluctuate with their circumstances and their stressors in their life. So they might need coaching while they're really stressed in college, but then they start a job that's they don't really need support. Then years later, they might become a mother, a working mother, and they've got 2 kids and they cannot manage everything. You can go back into coaching. Like it's not something that you do once and never going to need again. I would highly recommend that he looks into services for himself because it can be really, really helpful.
Katie, I'm going to ask you to address one other thing because it's come up throughout a number of questions. What are the kind of kids that you work with? Do you work with adults? So a lot of times we say, we work with young adults or failure to launch. And so can you kind of describe what we can do with folks that aren't in school?
Sure. First of all, we work with a lot of college kids or kids, or I'm sorry, adults who have just recently graduated and they're kind of getting their life started, or like you said, failure to launch, where they might have gone through some kind of schooling, but they're still at home and parents are trying to figure out like what does success look like for them and what does healthy independence look like. And in our neurocomplex program, I can take those students on, and some of our other coaches who specialize in adults and like career building and stuff, we can also help them. So feel free to reach out and we can talk about whether or not it's a good fit.
And we also have folks that if someone just definitely needs neurodiverse support on literally finding jobs and stuff and building resumes, I have a great person to refer to. So just shout. Okay, Katie, someone reminded me that I didn't ask a question. I work with a
Okay.
learner who avoids transitions to the bathroom. Once in a bathroom, tasks are completed without support, but they refuse the transition every time. This is consistent across individuals placing the demand, the activity the learner is engaged in when the demand is placed, and the language used. We've also tried timers for bathroom reminders with no verbal instructions. The learner has very limited expressive language.
Okay. I'm guessing that this learner is young, or in terms of like their level of autism, it is probably like more profound. I would tend back towards traditional behavioral science, although I know that that's like scary for a lot of people. What I would say would be gentle shaping around this. And we can talk about this more too if you want to reach out. But I would say the transition to the bathroom, we need to think about it in terms of length and like distance. So our first goal is getting them closer to the bathroom. Like, hey, if you come with me and we sit 5 feet from the bathroom, then you can have iPad for 3 minutes. Then, okay, now you've done that. The next thing is we're going to go in and stand in the bathroom. Then you can have iPad for 3 minutes. So you also give a warning that you're about to do that. So I would say like 5 minutes before, like, hey, it's going to be time for a bathroom break in 5 minutes. We're going to go and stand halfway in the hallway. So your goal is proximity to the target. It's not the actual target. That's called shaping. And we can talk more about it. I'm sorry. I feel like some of these really need a much more in-depth explanation.
Okay, I think we have one last one that we can take. I know people are falling off, but I'm trying to address every question. If you asked a question and I didn't address it, please put it back in the chat and I will ask Katie. So 4-year-old ASD with possible ADHD. She masks all day. When home, I'm not sure if she's completely relaxes and have the safe space until almost bedtime. When we ask or have a question, she acts like she's on the spot, even with the beginning being gentle about a question, and she does a song and dance, quote unquote, routine to distract and try to make us laugh and happy. What can I do to ensure she feels like she can shut off the masking when she's home? Thanks so much.
Mm, this is such a toughie because she's so young, and at school she is picking up social cues that she's probably very hyper vigilant about. Most of our young girls with ASD look like this. So when she comes home, it could be really confusing about like how to turn that off. I might use modeling before I even talk about her behavior. So I'm talking about myself. Like, wow, today I feel so tired and I feel like I'm in a really grumpy mood. And you know what would make me feel better? Maybe just laying with a blanket and watching a show. So you're showing yourself forgiveness and grace and giving yourself a lot of space to reset so that she's learning that language and she starts being able to like apply it to herself. I would do that before. If she's having a hard time answering questions, back off the questions. Use declarative statements like, wow, you know what? You seem like you're feeling kind of grumpy today. Mommy's feeling grumpy too. And then just move right along. No questions.
Thanks, Katie. One more.
Sure.
My 13-year-old girl always says she forgets everything. How do I get her to remember a task or what was asked? Taking meds, brushing teeth every day. This sounds like so many of our clients.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Katie.
This is another one. Let's say, let's hop on a call and talk.
Yeah.
What I will say is that she's not lying. ADHD and working memory, it really is a major deficit. So she might hear you, but she's really not hearing you. And she won't remember that you ever asked her to do something or that there was a stimuli that reminded her until the next cue comes. And then suddenly it comes rushing back. So then she's trying to like figure out like, how do I bridge the gap and show people that I didn't forget? That's already so much energy in and of itself. I would say if we're focusing just on the forgetting, then also give yourself grace and talk about it in terms of her brain. Yeah, your working memory is not your best tool. So how do we build stuff around you so that we're not relying on your working memory? Because it could get marginally better, but it's probably always going to be the thing that we're working on. So I would just use a lot of forgiveness language. Again, modeling like yourself, like, yeah, I forget stuff all the time too. You know what helps me? And you start showing her how you're using reminders in your everyday life.
Okay. I think we have everyone who's gotten their question answered. Katie, thank you so much for taking your time out of your insanely busy day to do this.
Thank
I
you.
hope everyone, no, I hope everyone found it helpful. Um, I can't say enough how amazing Katie is. And she helps with my own kids and she helps with so many of our kids that we work with. And so I'm very appreciative. And I hope you guys all found this useful. And we are here to help you find resources too. So you can always reach out and feel free to ask for a resource. If we don't know one, we'll help find one for you. And feel free to call Katie as well. And we look forward to hopefully continuing to have a conversation with everybody here. And we will be letting you guys know when our next quarterly, for the next quarter, what our less stress parenting webinar will be. So thank you so much for your time and attending.